Hello and welcome back, dear students, once again to your channel. In today's video, we shall be discussing a very important short story from your ISC syllabus. This one is called A Living God, and this is found in your ISC collection of short stories book called The Prism. Okay, uh, this is the first story that is there in your IC syllabus, and this short story is by Lafcadio Hearn. All right. Now, before I begin, you know what is coming up next? Yes. If you find my videos interesting and helpful, please do not forget to give me a like and, most importantly, subscribe to my YouTube channel. It shall keep me motivated. All right, so without any further ado, let's get started. Uh, A Living God by Lafcadio Yarn. I am on page 5. I keep reminding you, dear children, that whenever we are reading a poem or a short story, it is very important for us to go through the added information that is given in the box at the beginning of each chapter. All right, so here we are on page 5 about the author. All right. So Patrick Lafcadio Yarn, 1850 to 1904, was also known by his Japanese name Koizumi Yakumo. Okay, was born on the Greek islands of Leviticus. He was an international writer, translator, and journalist proficient in English, Greek, and Japanese languages. All right, we come down Uh, second paragraph, the fourth line. His popular books include Exotics and Retrospective, In Ghostly Japan Shadowings, A Japanese Miscellany, and Kawaiidan, Stories and Studies of Strange Things, along with numerous other texts that earned him fame in Japan as well as in Western world. All right. Through his works, he acquainted the world with Japanese customs, religion, and the literature of Japan. The present narrative, this part is important. The present narrative is an excerpt. Excerpt means a small part. This is not the entire story. The present narrative is an excerpt from his book, Gleanings in Buddha Fields, 1897. Uh, then come down. He answers, a living God tells the story of a tsunami affecting a village of farmers. What is a tsunami? Tsunami is an underwater earthquake. Okay. He answers, a living God tells the story of a tsunami affecting a village of farmers along the Japanese coast. A rich farmer, Hamaguchi Gohei, saves his people by setting his precious crops on fire so they can see the smoke and hurry to a safe place. His grandson thought that he had become mad, but Hamaguchi paid no attention, as his plan was successful and he had saved the villagers. The influential resident of the village, living in a farmhouse virtually disconnected from his own people, is now the god that lives in great honor among them all. The story of Hamaguchi is an account of sacrifice, selfless action, and presence of mind. So, dear students, this part is very important. This is the theme of the story. The story is an account of sacrifice, selfless action, and presence of mind. So, without any further delay, let's get to the story. A Living God. From immemorial time, the shores of Japan have been swept at regular intervals of centuries by enormous tidal waves. Tidal waves caused by earthquakes or by submarine volcanic action. These awful sudden risings of the sea are called by the Japanese tsunami. Uh, the last one occurred on the evening of June 17, 1896, when a wave of nearly 200 miles long struck the northwestern provinces of Miyagi, Iwate, and Amori, wrecking scores. Wrecking means causing absolute destruction. Scores of towns and villages, many villages and towns, ruining whole districts and destroying nearly 30,000 human lives. So, a lot of havoc and destruction was caused by the last tsunami. The story of Hamaguchi Gohei is the story of a life calamity, which happened long before the era of Meiji. Meiji is the era, which dates back to the Japanese history on another part of the Japanese coast. And now we have the introduction to our protagonist. He was an old man at the time of the occurrence that made him famous. He was the most influential resident of the village to which he belonged. He had been for many years its Murausa, meaning the headman, and he was not less liked than respected. So he was equally liked and respected. That was his stature. The people usually called him Oisan, which means grandfather. But being the richest member of the community, he was sometimes officially referred to as the Choja. So he was known by different names, and these different names are significant. Why? Because it brings out the stature, the position he held in the village. He used to advise the small farmers about their interests, to arbitrate their disputes, that is, to settle their disputes, to advance them money at need, and to dispose of their rice for them on the best terms possible. So he was, available for anyone and everyone for everything. Hamaguchi's big thatched farmhouse stood on the verge of the small plateau overlooking a bay. So this is where he used to live. This you could expect for your 5 mark question. Describe the place where Hamaguchi lived or describe the house where Hamaguchi lived. And your previous paragraph could be another 5 marker question on how is Hamaguchi Gohei introduced to the reader right at the beginning of the story. So these are very intricate details which you need to remember. So coming back to the place where Hamaguchi lived, Hamaguchi's big thatched farmhouse stood on the verge of a small plateau overlooking a bay. The plateau, mostly devoted to rice culture, was hemmed, that is, dotted or surrounded in on three sides by thickly wooded summits. So agriculture was the primary occupation of the people out here, and Hamaguchi was no exception. He used to grow rice. He used to cultivate rice. From its outer verge, the land sloped down in a huge green concavity as if scooped out to the edge of the water, and the whole of this slope, some 3/4 of a mile long, was so terraced so to look, when viewed from the open sea, like an enormous flight of green steps divided in the center by a narrow wide zigzag, a streak of mountain road, 90 thatched dwellings, that is, small houses, and a Shinto temple. Shinto temple is the local god, composing of the village proper, stood along the curve of the bay, and other houses climbed, straggling up the slope for some distance on either side of the narrow road leading to the Choja's home. So, this is an elaborate description of the place where the Choja or Hamaguchi Gohei or the protagonist of the story lived. You could expect this for a 5 mark question. One autumn evening, Hamaguchi Gohei was looking down from the balcony of his house at some preparations for a merrymaking in the village below. What is merrymaking? For some sort of a celebration that was going to happen in the village. There had been a very fine rice crops, and the peasants were going to celebrate their harvest by a dance in the court of the Ujigami. The old man could see the festival banner, locally known as Nabori, fluttering above the roofs of the solitary steep. Why is the street solitary? Because people are busy in making preparations for their celebration. They have gathered somewhere else. All right. So the streets are solitary. The strings of paper lanterns festooned between bamboo poles, the decorations of the shrine, and the brightly colored gathering of the young people. He had nobody with him that evening but his little grandson, a lad of 10. Lad is a young boy. The rest of the household having gone early to the village. He would have accompanied them had he not been feeling less strong than usual. So, he is an old man and he is not keeping well, perhaps, and therefore he did not wish to participate in the celebration. So, when everybody else is left for the celebration, he was left only with his grandson. The day had been oppressive, that is, extremely humid and sultry. And in spite of a rising breeze, there was still in the air. So there was a calmness in the air. That sort of heavy heat, which, according to the experience of the Japanese peasant, at certain seasons precedes an earthquake. This is very significant. The unusual humidity and the calmness in the air was suggestive that something wrong was in the offering. And Hamaguchi Gohei, being an old man, an experienced man, realized that this is a signal of a preceding earthquake. And presently an earthquake came, and so the earthquake also came. It was not strong enough to frighten anybody, but Hamaguchi, who had felt hundreds of shocks in his time, thought it was queer. Queer means strange. A long, slow, spongy motion. Probably it was, but the after tremor of some immense seismic action very far away. So, probably the epicenter of the earthquake was a little away from this place, and it was only the shocks that were felt here. So, no real damage was done here, initially at least. The house crackled and rocked gently several times, then all became still again. As the quaking ceased to stop, Hamaguchi's keen old eyes were anxiously turned toward the village. It often happens that the attention of a person gazing fixedly at a particular spot or object is suddenly diverted by the sense of something not knowingly seen at all, by a mere vague feeling of the unfamiliar in that dim outer circle of unconsciousness perception which lies beyond the field of clear vision. This part is very significant. It highlights the constant tussle between innocence and experience. For the inexperienced, lot of details goes unnoticed, but for the experienced man, the things which are in between enveloped, things which are not very clear to the to the normal eye also seems very pertinent for the experienced people. He rose to his feet and looked at the sea. It had darkened quite suddenly and it was acting strangely. It seemed to be moving against the wind. It was running away from land. Usually, what happens when how do waves form? Waves are formed when there is a huge gush of wind, and so the waves also move towards the in the direction of the wind. But here something else was happening. The waves were there in the sea, but the waves were moving against the wind because the waves were towering upwards. Okay. Within very little time, the whole village had noticed the phenomenon. Apparently, no one had felt the previous motion of the ground, but all were evidently astounded by the movement of the water. This is what I was trying to say. If you're inexperienced, a lot of things go unnoticed. Like the earthquake, the preceding earthquake went unnoticed for most of the villagers. But it did not escape the notice of this old man known as Hamaguchi Gohei. And now the strange acting of the sea. is noticed by not only Hamaguchi but the villagers also. They were running to the beach and even beyond the beach to watch it. No such ebb had been witnessed on the coast within the memory of living man. So it was very, very a rare sight. Things never seen before were making apparition. Unfamiliar spaces of ribbed sand and reaches of weed hung rock were left bare even as Hamaguchi gazed, and none of the people below appeared to guess what the monstrous ebb signified. Hamaguchi Gohei himself had never seen such a thing before, but he remembered things told to him in his childhood by his father's father. So Hamaguchi Gohei had heard stories of similar, uh, you know, uh, earthquakes hitting the coast of Japan from his grandfather, and he knew all the traditions of the coast. He understood what the sea was going to do. This is what experience make you realize. Perhaps he thought of the time when he needed to send a message to the village or to get the priests of the Buddhist temple on the hill to sound their big bell, but it would take much longer to tell what he might have thought than it took him to think. He simply called to his grandson, Tada, quick, very quick, light me a torch. Tada is the name of the grandson. Taimatsu or pine torches are kept in many coast dwellings for use on stormy nights and also for use at certain Shinto festivals. The child kindled, that is lighted up, a torch at once, and the old man hurried with it to the fields, where hundreds of rice stacks representing most of his invested capital stood awaiting transportation. So just imagine, I had told you that agriculture was their main occupation and Hamaguchi Gohei was no exception. So Hamaguchi's crops were all harvested, they were only waiting for transportation. And this man is now trying to light those crops on fire. Approaching those nearest the verge of the slope, he began to apply the torch to them, hurrying from one to another as quickly as his aged limbs could carry him. The sun-dried stalks caught like tinder the strengthening sea breeze, blew the blaze landward, and presently, rank behind rank, the stacks burst into flame, sending skyward columns of smoke that met and mingled with one enormous cloudy whirl. Tada, astonished and terrified, ran after his grandfather, crying, Oi-san, why, Oi-san? Why? He's a young boy. He's a child, basically. He's unable to understand that why is his grandfather lighting up or setting fire to this entire harvested crop? Because their fortune depends on all of this. So, has the grandfather gone mad? But Hamaguchi did not answer. He had no time to explain. He was thinking only of the 400 lives in peril, perilous danger. For a while, the child stared wildly at the blazing rise, then burst into tears because he is absolutely helpless. His grandfather is lighting up or setting his the crops on fire, and he's unable to do anything. He knows that if there is no more crop left, he will not be able to feed. He will have to starve. But the grandfather is not listening. So, as a child, all he could do is express his helplessness, and that is why he cries. Yet, Hamaguchi went on firing stack after stack till had reached the limit of his feet. Then he threw down his torch and waited. The acolyte of the hill temple, observing the blaze, set the big bell booming, and the people responded to the double appeal. So, what is the double appeal? Number one, the fire, which Hamaguchi Gokai had set, and number two, the big bell, which was rung by the acolyte of the Shinto temple. Acolyte is your priest. Hamaguchi watched them hurrying in from the sands and over the beach and up from the village like a swarming of ants, and to his anxious eyes, scarcely faster for the moments seemed terribly long to him. The sun was going down, the wrinkled bed of the bay, and a vast swallow speckled expanse beyond it lay naked to the last orange glow, and still the sea was fleeing towards the horizon. Really, however, Hamaguchi did not have to wait very long before the first party of succor arrived. A score of agile means swift, young peasants who wanted to attack the fire at once. Attack the fire is to douse the fire at once. But the Choja, holding out both arms, stopped him. Let it burn, lads, he commanded. Let it burn. I want the whole Mura here, the entire village here. There is great danger, the Hinda. The whole village was coming, and Hamaguchi counted. All the young men and boys were soon on the spot, and not a few of the more active women and girls then came, most of the older folk and mothers with babies at their backs, and even the children. For children could help to pass water, and elders too feeble to keep up with the first rush could be seen well on their way up that steep ascent. The growing multitude, still knowing nothing, looked alternately in sorrowful wonder at the flaming fields and at the impassive face of the Choja, and the sun went down. So even these men and women of the village are unable to understand why Hamaguchi would do such a task. Grandfather is mad, I'm afraid of him, sobbed Tada. Now Tada gets little, you know, uh, what should I say, little bit of confidence, seeing that other people were also equally clueless at the Choja's work. So he now, for the first time, expresses that I think grandfather has gone mad. He is mad. He set fire to the rice on purpose. I saw him do it. As for the rice, cried Hamaguchi, the child tells the truth. I set fire to the rice. Are all people here? The Kumichu and the heads of the families looked about them and down the hill and made reply, all are here, or very soon will be. We cannot understand this thing. Kita, shouted the old man at the top of his voice, pointing to the open. Say now if I be mad. And now he asks everyone to turn their eyes towards the sea and decide whether actually grandfather had been mad. Through the twilight eastward, all looked and saw at the edge of the dusky horizon a long, lean, dim line like the shadowing of a coast where no coast ever was. So the entire water was sucked up. A line that thickened as they gazed, that broadened as a coastline broadens to the eyes of one approaching it, yet incomparably more quickly. For that long darkness was the returning sea, towering like a cliff and coursing more swiftly than the kite flies. So all the water of the sea have been sucked up, and it has formed a huge tower, a huge column. All right. Through the twilight, tsunami, shrieked the people, and then all shrieks and all sounds and all power to hear the sounds were annihilated by a nameless shock heavier than any thunder. So there were repeated shocks. As the colossal swell smote the shore with a weight that sent a shudder through the hills, and with a foam burst like a blaze of sheet lightning. Then, for an instant, nothing was visible but a storm of spray rushing up the slope like a cloud, and the people scattered back in panic. From the mere minutes of it, people were extremely scared as what would happen to them if if this entire column of water come and fall on them. They will be all swept away. When they looked again, they saw a white horror of sea raving over the place of their homes. So, whatever destruction had to be done is being on done. It drew back roaring and tearing out the bowels of the land as it went. Twice, thrice, 5 times the sea struck and ebbed, but each time with lesser surges. Then it returned to its ancient bed and still raging, as after a typhoon. So this is how the tsunami struck. This is again a 5 mark answer. So you see, there was no time for Hamaguchi Gohei to wait for the acolyte to ring the bell or send message to everyone that please come to this upper part of the land because the tsunami is going to strike. So he, without any second thought, started lighting fire to his most coveted harvest of the year. He does not think, even for a second, that if my crop is gone, what will I eat tomorrow? He places himself above his interest. He places other individuals' interest above his own interests. And that is why he becomes a living God. We will see how it is done further. That was why I set the fire to the rice. He, their Choja, now stood among them almost as the poorest, for his wealth was gone, but he had saved 400 lives by his sacrifice. So 400 lives were sacrificed. Were to be sacrificed if he had not called the people up here. Little Tada ran to him. Now he realizes his folly, and caught his hand and asked forgiveness for having said naughty things. Whereupon the people woke up to the knowledge of why they were alive and began to wonder at the simple, unselfish foresight that had saved them, and the headmen prostrated themselves in the dust before Hamaguchi Gohei and the people after them. Then the old man wept a little, partly because he was happy and partly because he had aged and weak and had been sorely tired. My house remains, he said, as soon as he could find words, automatically caressing Tada's broken cheeks. So he assures the people that please do not get worked up that your houses have been swept. My house is still there. You can stay there. So he is not even hesitant to sacrifice his own life for the cause of humanity. Also, their temple on the hill stands, and there is shelter there for the others. So, those of you who can fit in my house, well and good, and those of you who cannot, there's a temple on the hilltop. You can stay there, and then there are other shelters available also on higher lands. You could take your shelter there, refuge there. Then he led the way to his house, and the people cried and shouted. So they were all moved by this act of sacrifice, okay, from the Choja. The period of distress was long because in those days there were no quick means of communication. Distress is trouble. Uh, there were no quick means of communication between district, and help needed had to be sent from far away. But when better times came, the people did not forget their debt to Hamaguchi Gohei. They could not make him rich, nor would he have suffered them to do so, even it had been possible. Moreover, gifts could never have sufficed as an expression of their reverential feeling, because gifts will only measure your materialistic values. And from your reading of your Vasavadatta and Upagupta's poem, you know that materialistic pursuits hold no value in today's world also. They are momentary happiness. Moreover, gifts could never have sufficed as an expression of their reverential feeling towards him. So, for they believed that the ghost within him was divine, the soul within him was someone sent from the above. So they declared him a god and thereafter called him Hamaguchi Damoin, thinking they could give him no greater honor, and truly no greater honor in any country could be given to mortal man. And when they rebuilt the village, they built a temple to the spirit of him and fixed above the front of it a tablet bearing his name in Chinese text of gold. So they made a temple for him, and you know in gold, they wrote their name, Hamaguchi Gohei. Such was their respect. Now you might ask, why gold? Again, a materialistic pursuit. Gold because gold is not only considered invaluable, but gold is supposed to hold or rather stand the test of time. It is not going to wear off easily. That is why. And of course, gold is so expensive that it will not have any. this thing, value. It is beyond expensive. So in Chinese gold, and they worshipped him there with prayer and offering. So nowhere in any country's history has this been done where a man is considered as God and worshipped in temple. Okay, at least a living man. There are, temples dedicated to men who have made a lot of sacrifices, but only after that, after they've died. Hamaguchi Gohei was the only person whose temple was made only when he was alive. For example, you see in Sikkim we have Baba Mandir. Baba Mandir is, made for this particular Jawan, Baba Harbhajan Singh, for this particular soldier who sacrificed his life for humanity. And the people, as a mark of their tribute and respect, made the temple for him. And it is believed that Baba Harbhajan Singh comes every night to this temple. The sound of bullet bike can be heard by people, the locals claim it. Okay, but then that is done after Baba Harbhajan Singh had, you know, passed away. He lost his life in the battle trying to save civilians. But Hamaguchi Gohei is a living individual, is a living person, and his temple is made when he is very much alive. That was the respect people have. That was the reverence which people had in their heart, in their mind. Alright. How he felt about it, I cannot say. So, this is the author's comment. I know only that he continued to live in his own thatched home upon the hill. But this idea that he is now looked up as God did not change him. He remained the humble individual that he was, and he continued to live in his hut. I only know that he continued to live in his old thatched home upon the hill with his children and his children's children just as humanly and simply as before, while his soul was being worshipped in the shrine below. 100 years and more he had been dead, but his temple, they tell me, still stands, and the people still pray to the ghost of the good old farmer to help them in time of fear or trouble. I asked a Japanese philosopher and friend to explain to me how the peasants could rationally imagine the spirit of Hamaguchi in one place while his living body was in another. Because he continued to live in his hut while he was worshipped in the temple. So, how was it done? Also, I inquired whether it was only one of his souls which they had worshipped during his life, and whether they imagined that the particular soul to have detached itself from the rest to receive homage. The peasants, my friend answered, think of the mind or spirit of a person as something which, even during life, can be in many places at the same instant. So, this Japanese belief that soul is not fixed in any physical entity, it can be present at one point of time in multiple places. Okay, and that is why they kept worshipping him in the temple. Such an idea is, of course, quite different from Western ideas about the soul. Of course, the Western people do not believe that. They believe the body only holds the soul. And it is only when they die that the soul is escaped. Any more rational? I mischievously asked. Do you have any other logic behind it? Well, he responded with a Buddhist smile. If we accept the doctrine of the unity of all mind, the idea of the Japanese peasant would appear to contain at least some adumbration that is of truth. Adumbration means some justification. I could not say so much for your Western notions about the soul. So, what is the law? This thing he says. If you go by the unity of all mind, then you would know that if the minds are united, then the soul can stay in different places. So, you see, this is the story. The story basically chronicles or charts the rise of Hamaguchi Gohei from Murausa to an Oisan to a Choja and then finally to a Des Moines of the village. So he becomes a living god by covering these stages one by one. Just like your Macbeth had made a steady rise in his career, we see Hamaguchi Gohei is making a steady growth in his, uh, you know, in his life. All right. So a long question could be to trace and growth the development of Hamaguchi Gohei from the time from Choja to that of Des Moines, or rather from a Murausa to the Des Moines. Okay. So and why is he a living god? The one I told you that like Mother Teresa had sacrificed her entire life for humanity and she got sainthood only after she passed away. Similarly, Jesus Christ, he sacrificed his entire life for mankind, trying to redeem men of their sin. But that also, he was also considered a god after his death. It is only Hamaguchi Kohei, because of the Japanese philosophy of unity of mind, which wherein people believe that souls could dwell in multiple places at multiple times, was a temple erected for him. And the name of Hamaguchi Gohei was written in Chinese text of gold by the people for their reverence towards Hamaguchi Gohei's selfless sacrifice. All right. So this is the story for you, children. I hope I could provide you with an easy explanation of the story. But please do not forget that if you have watched the video till now, and this video is going to help you write your answers in your exam, you are requested to give me a like and also subscribe to my channel, which shall keep me motivated. Alright, so see you in the next video. Till then, take very good care of your health and goodbye.